Hi, I'm John Kapelos. I am the eyes and ears of this institution, and you are listening to Fascination Street podcast. And by the way, that clock is 20 minutes fast.
AV in your ears, that's Ambush Being, giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street, you already know. Let's get it when you whip in the Fascination Street. What do you...
Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with John Kapelos. Most of you know him as Carl the Janitor from The Breakfast Club, who is the eyes and ears of this institution. But he is so many other things. He was in Second City forever. He was in the touring company for 8 years. We talk about all kinds of stuff. We go everywhere. Of course, we talk about Second City. Of course, we talk about John Hughes and The Breakfast Club. But we also talk about Seinfeld. He is in one of the most memorable scenes in one of the most memorable episodes of Seinfeld. And we talk about that. We talk about his time on the TV show Psych and how that came to be. He shares a crazy story about how he almost got killed by the United States Secret Service. What? And then at the very end, we talk about, get this, his music. So not only is John an accomplished actor, writer, and director, but also he is a fantastic musician. He's graciously allowing me to play one of his songs. You're going to shit when you hear this song because of what song it is and how well he does it. He's everywhere on social media and he has music. He's on Spotify. It's free. It's called John Kapelos, Too Hip for the Room is the name of the album. So search for him. And this is my conversation with actor, director, writer, and apparently musician, John Kapelos.
Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, John Kapelos. How you doing today, man?
I am wonderful. Thank you very much, Sir Steve.
I am so excited. Ladies and gentlemen, streetwalkers, if you will. That's right. You heard me right. I said John Kapelos. Among other things, which we'll talk about later, this man right here is solely responsible for why I did not keep my weed in my locker in high school.
Oh, really? I was that reason?
You were solely responsible for that, so I appreciate you.
So where do you keep your weed now?
Well, now I can keep it anywhere I want because it's just about legal. Ish.
Not legal where you are?
No, I'm in Texas. It's sort of some weird Farm Bill Delta 9 kind of workarounds. It's not the California or Washington stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, this man is the eyes and ears of every institution. John, we're going to talk about all kinds of things. But first, what I like to do, John, is I like to start from the beginning. It helps us understand how the guests got from where they were to where they are. So if you don't mind, where were you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in London, Ontario, Canada. Beautiful small town, well, smallish town between Detroit and Toronto in southern Ontario, Canada. And I had a really great childhood, great parents, wonderful home. Can't complain.
Can't complain. From Nathan Detroit to Dr. Detroit and everything in between.
Yeah.
Now, in high school, were you really Nathan Detroit in high school?
I was Nathan Detroit. I was in the school play. I pulled curtains in the grade 9, ninth grade, and I was so envious. I auditioned for the school play the next year, and I became Nathan Detroit. So I went from curtain puller to star.
From curtain puller to the lead.
The lead, yeah. I mean, we had a really good band. We had a good theater department. I mean, it wasn't what a lot of kids nowadays have a lot like this semi-pro stuff in these performance high schools. I mean, these are quite phenomenal. But that said, I mean, it was really great. Any kid that's offered sort of an environment where they can actually do a play and stretch out, I think is fun. I think it took me by surprise how much I really liked it. I liked it, but like, man, when I started doing it, I was like, really like this.
Was it the attention?
A lot of it was the attention.
Because you're the youngest of three, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. You know, I mean, there's a lot to be said for being the youngest. I mean, there are lots of people you can catalog it in show business that are the youngest children. It was the attention, getting out of class, getting to hang with the opposite sex. And I don't mean to be facetious about this looking back on it, because, all those things really played a huge part. But I also think, I could do it. And the problem I find looking back in high school, I don't know where you grew up or how you grew up and stuff, but for me, they stopped teaching my side of the brain around grade 9 or 10. I really lost interest because, they were about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but I tended to be a little bit more creative or a little bit more on another side of the brain. And, I tuned out after 10th grade academically. This is why the theater sort of made me oh, okay, this is something cool. In some way, it was strangely tangible.
So it was the theater that kept you from dropping out of high school.
Well, I mean, the thought of dropping out of high school, being the youngest of 3, particularly with 2 overachieving siblings, was absolutely, not going to happen.
Well, okay, so you said overachieving. Both of your siblings, didn't they go to Ivy League colleges or something?
My brother went to Princeton, and then he went on to get other degrees at Harvard and Yale. My sister went to McGill in Montreal and also did a program at Princeton. On paper, they were smart, but they're also really kind of great people. I mean, not just merely smart. That's not what they led with.
Sure.
Certain people will tell you that they're smart first thing out of the box, and that's not them. The fact that they had skills in that way and, that they achieved academically, as a younger sibling, at the time, I sort of went, didn't dig it that much. But now looking back on it, it's great. They happen to be smart. And I had parents that were understanding insofar as, when I decided I wanted to be acting, they were pretty cool about it initially.
So growing up in London, Ontario, I got to imagine you were just across the lake from Motown. Is that right?
Well, I mean, across the river, technically, Detroit River. I mean, across the lake from Cleveland, across the lake from Buffalo. But Detroit was a little bit more, I think, adjacent.
Okay.
And, we grew up with cable TV, London, Ontario. The kids in my northern London, the wealthy kids at least, were the first people to have cable in North America. Cable started in London, Ontario.
Was it Rogers Cable or something? What was it?
Yeah, Rogers was a guy who wired certain neighborhoods because people were saying, we want to watch Johnny Carson and, Jack Parr or something. So I'd go to school and my friends of mine would say, yeah, we watched ABC TV last night. I said, what? How'd you do that? And then I got on my parents' back. And by the time I got to high school, my parents got cable, just when I was about to leave.
Sure. Yeah. That's what they do, man. I'm sorry. I brought up Motown because I think I heard you say once that when you were growing up, Motown was just everywhere. The music was just, you couldn't, it was just everywhere.
Well, I mean, if you listen to CKLW, which was the Windsor station, which basically, was in cahoots with Motown. I mean, if you listen to the old air checks about it on CKLW, and also, I mean, it was just ubiquitous. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't turn on the radio without hearing Beatles, Stones, Motown, or some variation of that, Beatles, Stones, Philadelphia sound, Motown. Particularly, I mean, if you had your ear glued to the transistor radio like I did. The thing about Detroit is my mother was from Boston, and I sort of grew up this sort of, I had this American and an absentia vibe. I liked being a Canadian kid, but I was American envious, and Detroit was the closest big city. So, and then Detroit burned in 1967. I was born in the 1950s, so I remember these things. And it was kind of the epicenter of a lot of good stuff, bad stuff, right? They made cars in Detroit, which was cool. They made interesting music. And then they also rioted like crazy, right?
Sure.
And now as an adult, I realized it was one of the cities like Chicago and Buffalo that had a lot of post-Second War Black immigration and the problems therein. Living in Chicago as I did with Second City, I learned a lot about that. But that's all in the future. I was just a kid when I was a kid. And yeah, growing up with Motown. And I don't know how old you are, but I mean, the thing about music at any age is it captivates. It was 1971 or 3 when I started picking tobacco, and I worked with the tobacco farms in the summer, and I brought my transistor radio, of course, and I started listening to the FM station from Cleveland, the guy named Bruce Springsteen. I remember hearing that for the first time. It's like, wow.
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
Bruce Springsteen.
Springsteen, you're saying? Okay, I'll have to look him up.
Steen.
Oh, okay.
People don't really listen to him now.
I think he's famous for being on the finale of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I think that's what he's famous for.
The
now.
boss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which everybody's talking about.
Well, my wife and I just watched it last night because we had out of town guests for the eclipse. And so we just finally watched the series finale last night. Oh my gosh. I was so happy about it. I think they did a great job. I was very impressed because everybody was super nervous because of how Seinfeld ended. And I just think they did such a great job with it. But back to Motown. I don't know if you know this, but fellow Canadian Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame, before he even met Cheech Marin, he was signed with Motown. There was a band called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, and they did a song called Does Your Mama Know About Me, which later on Diana Ross covered as well. But Tommy Chong wrote that song, and it was a huge hit. It was a mediocre hit for Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, but it was a huge hit for Diana Ross. And I recently heard Cheech verify this, that Chong is the one who said to Berry Gordy, hey, you got to check out these kids over here. They're called like the Jackson 5.
In Gary, Indiana, when they were nothing, huh? Wow.
Yeah, like supposedly, Chong has said it before, but Cheech confirmed, for whatever that's worth, Tommy was the 300th guest of my show. It happened to fall on 420.
Well, that's timing that you couldn't ask for. Well, they had Beat Street on TCM the other night, and his daughter Ray Dawn Chong was in there, and I haven't seen her recently, but I mean, she had a bit of a run. I liked her. I mean, I was just wondering where she is now.
She had a huge career. I think it's hilarious that Tommy Chong went to prison for selling bongs, and now weed's legal just about everywhere, and he actually has his own business selling actual weed.
Well, I mean, why not?
I love it. Oh, the times. Okay, so long before you joined Second City, which we're going to talk about in a second. Well, I don't know about long before, but before you were actually part of Second City in Chicago, if I understand this correctly, you already had met and sort of befriended John Candy and Peter Tork.
Not Peter Tork of the Monkees. That's funny. No, there was a man named Peter Torkvey. Torkvei.
Okay, gotcha.
But Peter Torkvey was in the resident company of Second City, Toronto. And when I started taking workshops in 1978 with a group of folks, including a guy that became the drama critic of the Toronto Star, a guy named Rob Salem, who's on Facebook now, one of my friends, a good guy, and Monica Gus and Gerald Karsh and a group of other workshop folks from back then, the actors and wannabes. And we took workshops at Second City in Toronto. And John Candy was hanging out at that time because they were starting to write and produce a season of SCTV. And they were doing it at the Fire Hall in Toronto. So Peter Torkvey was in the company with Robin Duke. And Catherine O'Hara, I think, she wasn't in the company, but had been in the company. And they were there working on SCTV. Joe Flaherty.
R.I.P. recently, sadly.
Yeah, of course. So I started taking workshops there with this group of people. I'd hang out and they did improvs during the week. And I started talking to John Candy, Johnny Toronto, as people called him. He was, a larger-than-life guy, a wonderful guy. People talk about him fondly, and I certainly remember him fondly. And the guy was really open to doing a workshop with a group of us. I said, well, we're doing a workshop. He said, well, I'll come and, teach one Saturday or two. So we got a space, and he showed up, and more than showed up, he was there and taught us for a couple of hours at this space and then wouldn't take our money. So that's how I got to know John Candy. Now, Peter Torkvey went on to write some movies with Steve Campman. I think they wrote Club Paradise, a couple of other films. We can look them up. Peter Torkvey was a really good guy. He eventually became transgendered and changed his sex in his 40s, and then sadly died of cancer many years later. But he was a really good guy and really helpful to me, but not Peter Tork. John Candy, the one thing that one can say about him, and I know his daughter Jennifer now is quite a lovely person, and his wife Rose is still alive and thriving. John was just a great teacher, as well as a generous person, but he was a really good teacher. He was really good about improv and, open to the possibilities sort of guy. Fan-fucking-tastic dude. And really, 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 really sad about Joe Flaherty, of course. I had been told that he wasn't well, and we got a message to him, a group of us workshop people. And Joe was just a real gentleman to us when we were fledgling, starting up way back when. Nothing but nice things to say about a guy like that. And he was really instrumental in starting Second City Toronto in the early 70s.
How so?
Well, he basically, along with Bernie Solins, they found the fire hall and they designed the stage. And Bernie, the producer from Chicago, and Joe was sort of the artistic director. And then Harold Ramis was involved, and SCTV evolved out of that.
So what was it that made you want to go audition for Second City? Because I guess it was around August of 1978. You told your parents you had a gig in Chicago and you went and just auditioned. Well, first of all, what gig did they think you had?
Well, man, I told them I had a gig at Second City, but what I didn't tell them was that, I had to audition for the gig. I had sat around after doing a bit of extra work on SCTV, waiting for Bernie Solins, the producer who I'd given my phone number to call me back. And I realized that this guy's never going to call me back. So what I decided to do in a moment of what the Yiddish term would be chutzpah, in a moment of sort of absolute chutzpah, I went to my father in London, Ontario, said, Dad, I got an offer of a job in Chicago. Because our deal was, if I got a job offer as an actor, then I wouldn't have to go back to school. So I thought if I termed it like that. So he gave me his credit card. I took a Greyhound bus to Chicago, and I stayed at a really crummy hotel, $28 a night, theatrical rates. And I showed up at the door of Second City and surprised the hell out of Joyce and Bernie Solins and said, I'm here to audition. And they went, what? I thought I could be there for 2 days. And they said, well, wait until Monday. This was a Friday. So I had to tell my father, well, I got to stay here the next couple of days. I went down there on a wing and a prayer, and I auditioned that Monday, and I got a job offer. That's how I started acting professionally. The day I got the job offer, I called my mother that Monday, and I said, I got the job. She said, well, I already thought you already had the job. I said, well, I had to secure it. And then she goes, well, that's good. And she said, there's a package here from the United States consulate. Can I open it? I said, well, yeah. And it was my passport, my U.S. passport.
Well, that worked out.
That was kismet. I said, well, so long and farewell. Adieu, Canada.
One of the things I like to ask people, and specifically regarding your Second City audition, you said you went down there on a wing and a prayer. What made you think you could? Where did you get the confidence that made you drive across the country to audition, or to another country to audition for a job? What gave you that confidence?
It's a good question. And it's like I look back on it and I go, well, who the hell did I think I was? Mm-hmm. And for the most part, anybody at that age or any age that really wants to do something, let's say act or play music or do something creative, you have to, first of all, determine whether you can do it. And then the second thing is whether you want to do it. People often say, well, I want to do this, but they really don't want to do it because when they realize what it takes, and then how am I going to do it? And it was iffy, but, I'd spent some time at Second City, 3 months, 2 months, whatever. I'd done some extra work. I saw that I can do this. I can really do this. And now, if you can say those words to yourself unequivocally, I think you have a shot. Yeah, I was overly confident and stuff like that and pretty arrogant. And I think the wisest thing my father said to me was, get paid doing what you're going to do. There are theaters out there that are paying people. I had gone with my parents on their anniversary to New York several years before, and we had gone to see several plays on Broadway. And then we went out to restaurant dinner. And I'm an early teen at that time, maybe 12, 13, 14, whatever. And all the waiters and waitresses, beautiful, smart, intelligent, good-looking people, were all actors, right? So my father said to me, whatever you're going to be, when I told him I was going to be an actor, he said, get paid doing it. And that was one of the reasons Second City appealed to me. It's like they paid their actors and people came to the shows. You could get up on stage and you didn't have to do Shakespeare. You didn't have to do a script. You could improvise and write your own stuff and be funny. It's like, wow, this fucking works. So all that together sort of mixed together. And then also a kind of high pressure salesman that my dad was like, get a job, prove to me that you can do this. And, right place, right time, man. Right now it's like a university. You got to apply. There are all these different levels of training to get into Second City. Back then, they needed actors. And I showed up. It's a different deal.
Now, you stayed at Second City for about 8 years, somewhere around there,
Yeah. Yeah.
from like 78 to
86, 80.
So if my math is correct, my calendar math, that means that you were still at Second City when you made 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Dr. Detroit, and a bunch of other stuff. Why did you stay at SC so long when your career was so well on its way?
I wanted to do movies, and one of the mandates I had with my agent in Chicago was, if they're going to be shooting movies in Chicago, send me out to these films in Chicago. So, yeah, it seemed like I'd been doing a lot. But, that's a day or two in this movie, a day or two in this movie. I mean, Thief, I did bugger all on. I did Tootsie. That was sort of a fun yet empty experience in a lot of ways. Dusty and Bill Murray were taking lines away from everybody and kind of looking after their own interests. And they were both interesting experiences, but I was sort of plowed over in the fields. Thief was interesting, but I had a nothing part. And then so when I got 16 Candles and a few other movies, yeah, they were fun. And John promised me that, I'm going to do Breakfast Club. And then Breakfast Club happened and I wasn't in it. I was in New York doing a show off Broadway at Second City. And I have to say, the reason I stayed at Second City and through all those films was because I was learning and it was feeding me and I was working and the work was challenging and there wasn't any reason to leave. Now, again, I'll refer back to John Candy, and I've said this in several interviews, but it's well worth repeating. And it's something that I live by. Is I asked John, when do I leave Second City? And he says, when you're the best person on the stage. And there was one night, about 7 years into it, when I was on stage and I realized I was kicking ass and I wasn't learning anything from anybody else. And I was kind of the senior member of the company. And that was my way of realizing, not the best person on the stage, but this is time for me to leave. There's a natural period of evolution. And I stayed so long. I mean, I spent my 20s there because I didn't want to leave. And I didn't want to come to Hollywood or New York and have these places validate me. I wanted to go there and say, I'm a fucking actor and there's no way you can take it away from me. And I've done 9 movies already. And that was kind of the way I tenaciously hung on to it. I perhaps should have come out to LA earlier, maybe when Breakfast Club hit. Can't look back on that. Maybe things would have been different in a film career. But right now, I see too many actors, and I knew too many actors over the time that came out to LA, and they take acting classes, and they hadn't done a movie and stuff, and they try to make this town validate them. It's like, no. Chicago is where you learn, and New York and LA is where you display. And I hadn't learned enough in Chicago, even after doing all those movies. And then when you come to New York and LA, if you're not ready, man, look out. Because what people don't realize is that you might come out here and might say, well, I'm going to crack this egg 1, 2, 3 years. If people look at you once and pass on you, a whole variety of people pass on you, and that's it. You can spend the rest of your life out here, but it's not going to happen for you unless you're ready. Very few people will say that out loud.
Matthew McConaughey said very recently, like yesterday or something, that it took him a while to realize that there was an initiation process in Hollywood and that there was a bunch of mistakes that everybody makes, but nobody tells anybody else about the mistakes because you have to make them to grow enough to belong there. And he even said that if he could go back in time and had the opportunity to tell himself about some of the things that he was going to make mistakes with, he would not do it because he needed to go through those things to grow to be the person who, I don't know, is accepted in Hollywood or whatever.
Well, they should have told him that there are 2 San Vicente Boulevards. There are 2 Palm Boulevards. There are 3 Beverly Boulevards. And I'm sort of being serious, but, you learn when you go to an audition. And I've talked to several actors. Oh, yeah, I remember when I first came to LA, I had to go to an audition at San Vicente Boulevard, and I went to the wrong San Vicente Boulevard. And like my agent yelled at me and they fired me. And it's like, yeah, first thing you learn is how to get around. There's the old joke about they asked Betty Davis, how do you get ahead in Hollywood? She said, take Fountain. Now, Fountain is the street that's parallel to Sunset Boulevard. So it's a faster street when you're driving. But what McConaughey's referring to is you actually have to learn physically how to get around here, emotionally how to get around here being Hollywood. And also, yeah, the initiation, right? I mean, when I was starting out, we'd say, I'm paying my dues. I learned early on, I said, no, you're only paying your dues to yourself. In other words, you're not paying them to anybody else. So whatever initiation he was paying to himself.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors. Let's get back into it.
When you were talking about some of the films, John Hughes said you were going to be in this and that, but you said something, and I don't know if I heard it wrong or if you misspoke, but you said they were making The Breakfast Club and you weren't in it.
Yeah, I was in New York and I opened the trade papers and I see Breakfast Club is lensing in Chicago with the cast as we know them, plus Rick Moranis. And I went, oh, fuck. And I closed the magazine. It was a New York Variety. I remember the day vividly. It was a Monday. And literally that next morning, I get a call from my agent in Chicago saying, Rick Moranis is at a parting of the ways with John, and they were wondering whether you could come into town. I said, what time? What time do you want me to be there?
Yeah. So Rick Moranis was originally Carl the Janitor?
Yeah. Is this news to you?
It is to me, yeah.
The dealio is that Rick, good actor, retired from acting apparently after his wife passed several years ago, a Second City alum, Second City TV guy, a person I've never met, although I have a great deal of respect for him. I say that because I actually haven't ever said that out loud about him. And I've mentioned this story. But apparently he had the role before me, and he wanted to play the janitor with a Russian accent, big mouthful of gold teeth, and a wad of keys that dangled between his legs that he played with provocatively. And it was quite funny. But John Hughes said to him, well, yeah, okay, that's funny, cute. But have you read the script? Carl went to this high school. And Rick said, well, yeah, okay, but I want to try him like this. And so I guess they shot for a day and a half, whatever. I don't know the exact details. I understand it wasn't that long. And then it was like, okay, thanks. Not going to happen. And they recast. And they didn't go to anybody else except me, from what I understand.
Now, how many John Hughes films were you in? And we're going to count Ferris Bueller in.
25.
What? No, you were not. Stop it.
Yeah, I was in Gone with the Wind, Casablanca. Those every Billy Wilder movie. I did 3 movies in earnest with John, wherever Ernest is. I did The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and Weird Science. And then I also was in Ferris Bueller. I shot Ferris Bueller as a cab driver that takes Ferris downtown. That sequence I was cut out of that sequence. It didn't really work well.
Didn't move the story forward?
No, I don't think it moved the story forward. I think it was a bit that sort of didn't serve anything. John had a habit in his films of, the scripts were a bit sprawling sometimes. Breakfast Club was larger, and he'd have these other segments that he'd shoot, or, he'd shoot stuff even when we were shooting stuff. Like, let's try it this way, that, didn't make it. I mean, I did this whole sequence where I told them where they're going to be 30, 35 years from now today. It's available now on YouTube. They're all VHS outtakes. Have you seen that?
No, the deleted scenes? No, I haven't seen this. I'm afraid because I love that movie so much and I don't want it to change in my mind.
No, I appreciate that. I think that when you see those scenes, because I'm intimately involved with the movie, I'd say they don't really fuck with your memory of the movie because they reinforce the notion that the movie that was made was a movie that should have been made. And as much as I would have liked to have seen my sequences longer and all this and that, as I just said, the movie that was made is the movie that should have been made. And when you see those things, you go, yeah, that's interesting. And I have movies that, I don't really particularly want to see the outtakes on because it sort of takes the magic away a bit. But strangely enough, it reinforces the magic too. Because you go, yeah, that was cool. And I remember when I first realized that actors were in movies. I watched movies with my mother. And one day it was a war movie, it was a British war movie. My mother said, those guys aren't real soldiers, they're actors. And for the first day or so, I was really disappointed, right? Really disappointed. Like those guys weren't real soldiers and they were all making it up and there was a camera there. And she explained to me the whole deal, right? And then I went, wait a minute, that's cool. Those guys were making it up. There were camera and there was a story, there was a script. So it became cool all of a sudden, right? When I realized the art about it. So, I'm just saying to you, the original script for The Breakfast Club, man, it was so different. Things change and things evolve. And I've been involved in enough movies to understand and trust the process that, good things change to the way they should be.
Jonathan Schmock, the guy who played the maitre d' in Ferris Bueller.
Yeah.
He's a previous guest. He said a similar thing. He said that Ferris Bueller was kind of a whole different thing when they shot it. And to your point, Jonathan Schmock's character, the maitre d', had 10 times as many lines and 4 times as many scenes as what ended up in the film. Is that something that you noticed that John did a lot? Was just shoot a whole shitload of stuff that kind of didn't make it? I know a lot of people do that, but was that kind of his process?
Yeah, I think early on in his movies, when he was finding himself that way, I mean, the guy evolved from writing and then the National Lampoon. So writing is rewriting, as you know. And, he was indulged. John was given the keys to the kingdom. We were shooting film then, too. So there's this thing called shooting ratio, which means, how many takes you do to what is actually used. And John had a high shooting ratio. He'd shoot 10, 20, sometimes takes, like Stanley Kubrick numbers, and then you'd use 1 take. So that's high when you're shooting film and when you're shooting a lot of 35 millimeter expensive stuff. That said, the studio said, yeah, cool. You can do that because you're John Hughes. We're going to give you a lot of rope on that. What I noticed with the stuff we shot is we'd shoot 3 to 5 takes, maybe 6 as written. And then after that, he'd say, hey, because I'm Second City, do this, do that, do this, do that. That was the line where I was a kid. I wanted to be John Lennon came from. Because he said, well, what did you want to be when you were a kid? And I said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be John Lennon. Fuck, let's use that. Stuff like that was magic and kinetic. Paul Gleason sometimes got pissed off because I'd improvise this stuff after he did his close-up and his stuff. And he said, well, I didn't know he was going to say that. And well, John said, well, you wanted to go do your stuff first, which he did because he would throw around a bit of toot on that and want to go first. I've learned in various shoots, they'll let me go first. Maybe they'll defer to me as an actor now, but I don't insist on it. And I don't always think it's the best thing. I don't know whether you understand the nature of that, but when you're shooting a scene, you do a master and then 2 close-ups or something, depending on how the director works and set up. And some actors say, well, I want to be the first one to do my close-ups because if you have a lot of lines and stuff, they want to get out of the way. So in that scene in the basement, we're drinking the beer. Gleason, we'd do his take, and John would come around on me and throw some shit at me. And, like Gleason, I liked him. Don't want to speak ill of the dead. He was a good guy. Sad that he's gone. But we had a different way of working.
I want to back up just a hot second. Back when you were part of the touring group for Second City, your dad died. And you rejoined the touring group and got back on stage a week after your dad died. Why was it so important for you to do that? And looking back, what do you think you gained from that?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because the other night I did a performance at the Getty with a group of actors, a lot of them younger than me, and it was a really great experience. We did this theater workshop of this new play, Aristotle and Alexander. And I got kind of emotional before we went up on our final night saying, when something bad happens in your life, you got to keep on going. And I cited my father's death. My dad died suddenly on a Sunday night, October 1980. I was on the road with Second City, and I was in the Quad Cities of Illinois, and we were just doing the running order up in piano player Ruby's hotel room, and I got the message, and it was horrible, right? Your dad, he died suddenly at home. My producers at Second City were fantastic. I got on a plane out of there. I made it to Toronto by 8 o'clock, and my brother's there at the airport. We drove 2 hours to London, and I was home for a week. My mother, after a week, said, you know what, you got to get back on stage. Because frankly, I was ready to sort of hang at home for a bit. I was really down. And she said, no, you got to get back out there. First of all, you've got a job and you're a professional now. And second of all, you can't always do the things that you love when you love them and when it's easy. And that's a big life lesson. You don't always want to get up on the horse after you've broken your arm. You don't always want to get back into a car after you've had an accident. You don't always want to love somebody after you've been hurt in love. And you certainly don't want to get out and make people laugh after one of the biggest laughers in your life dies suddenly.
I am so sorry to bring that back up. I didn't know it was going to do that to you. I apologize.
Fuck no. No, it's the way I'm wired. And also, I don't mind being emotional. And please cut out your apology. It's the way things are, my man. I'm an emotional guy. I miss my family. As a person and as an actor, I recall that stuff. And you mustn't ever apologize for this because it's a big life lesson. When people lose people, I lose people every day, good friends. Sometimes you want to pull what I indelicately call the fuck it switch. Like, fuck it. I'm not going to do this anymore. Fuck it. I don't have to look after my diet. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. And you realize, no, but you do. There's a certain responsibility, not only to yourself, but to the people that raised you and to the people that, want you to continue. So I have to hand it to my mother for getting me back on the horse and to making me go back out there. Doing what you love sometimes means doing it when you don't love it. And so you may ask me, well, John, do you ever not like what you're doing? And there are days when...
Well, hold on. Let me ask you. Hey, John, do you ever not love what you're doing?
Well, I mean, there are days when I'm doing stuff that may not be the best film or the best stuff. I mean, you never know. I didn't know The Breakfast Club was going to be huge. I was hoping. There have been other movies I've done, put my heart and soul into it, and nothing happened. Some never get released. But you don't phone it in. And what's the Rudyard Kipling? When you meet triumph and disaster, you treat both imposters the same. So, you don't get too big, you don't get too small, you keep on going. I'm an emotional person, and I don't know anybody in comedy who isn't, honestly. But no, I mean, and also my dad was fun. He was gregarious. It bummed me out that he didn't get to see, he never got to see me in a movie or anything. My mom did. She loved Roxanne, my mother.
Oh, me too. Oh my gosh, I love that movie so much.
Me too.
Roxanne was such a good movie. And what's really funny is that the first time I heard the story of Cyrano de Bergerac was after I saw that movie. And I was like, they totally ripped off Roxanne.
It pissed me off too. What? Why would they do that?
Okay, let's make people laugh. Tell me about the time that you almost got killed by the U.S. Secret Service.
We were about to do a show at the Cellar Door in Washington, D.C., and Mike Haggerty and Lance Kinsey and Joe Doyle. Anyway, those are the guys in the company. We did this blackout. Blackout is a short, like almost an illustrated joke. Guy runs on the stage carrying something, looks like a nefarious character. Cop comes out behind him, Chicago cop with a hat. He has a gun, pulls it out, bang, 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 starter pistol, 3 loud bullets. The other guy drops dead. The cop looks around and yells, freeze, lights out. So that was the blackout that began the show. A big laugh, shooting somebody, then looking around, yelling, freeze. Well, backstage at the Cellar Door, which is a teeny little club, I think it's a Starbucks now, as a friend of mine said, in Georgetown in D.C. They said they drove by it the other day. Literally, she said, I drove by the Cellar Door the other day. Anyway, it's Sandra Bogan, who was in the company with us, who told me that. We're backstage, and we sort of had this curtain. It was a very makeshift sort of operation. We sort of had this makeshift stage. Cellar Door was mostly a music venue. And we're loading the starter pistol, and the curtain opens, and there's this guy standing there going, yeah, where are the bullets for the starter pistol? The guy looks over and goes, what? Starter pistol? And he comes backstage, goes, what's going on here? Well, yeah, we're just loading the starter pistol to show. You can't fire a starter pistol during the show. What do you mean? We have Chip Carter, and the Carter family children are out here tonight. Oh, that's who's sitting in the front row surrounded. Goes, yeah. If you were to fire that starter pistol, we'd have to take you guys down. So we had to go over the whole running order of the show with them. And naturally, the starter pistol thing was taken out there. But for the grace of God, go us on the stage at the Cellar Door.
Thanks, the children of President Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. Yeah, Chip Carter and family.
So was this after he was president or while he was president?
While he was president. We were there in the waning days of the Carter presidency.
Gotcha.
And actually, I think a couple of our cast members got to see a Star Wars movie. They screened it at the White House. I unfortunately didn't.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Tell me a story about you, Cloris Leachman, and your balls.
You could have said, and a part of my anatomy.
Okay. Tell me a story about you, Cloris Leachman, and a part of your anatomy.
Oh, you mean my balls? We did a show, resident company show, and Cloris Leachman was out front, I think with her son and daughter. I think her children were with her, grown children, lovely kids. And I didn't know anything about Cloris Leachman or her proclivities, but apparently the woman was rambunctious, had a marvelous sense of humor and a libido to match. So there's the center row of Second City in front of the main stage. And I come down after the show, and she's sitting there with a group of people. The theater is emptied, and she stands up and she goes, "I just love you." And she does this, when people are pitching a ball, fast pitch underhand, she fast pitch underhands and grabs my testicles and squeezes them so hard. And I just, she goes, "I just love, you're so funny." And she just grabs my balls and squeezes them. And I go, "Oh." And I just bend over and she laughs heartily. I'll tell you another story is when Shelley Winters came and saw our show. And she came backstage, the great Shelley Winters, and she was large at this point in her life. And we had a TV backstage, and on the TV was a 1955 movie with Jack Palance and Shelley Winters. And she's wearing a pink top. She looks really gorgeous. She goes, "Oh, Jack Palance, he always stuck his tongue down my throat, and he smelled, his breath smelled, and he was always trying to grab me, grab ass. Looking there with Shelley Winters. And then she said, "I've got to leave." And we had these garbage stairs at Second City. Garbage stairs, meaning this is where they took the garbage out backstage, directly down to the street. And she says, "I don't want to see anybody. If I could just go directly down the street." So, "Well, I'll take you out this exit." I didn't call them the garbage stairs. But what happened was all the garbage cans were sort of on the left side, and Shelley had a few things to drink, and we tripped as we were going down, and we sort of went ass over tea kettle down the garbage stairs. Made it down to Wells Street, and I got her to her car, and she got out of there.
I love that.
A lot of people came to Second City backstage. Jerry Paris, who was, Jerry Helper on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and a lot of nice people, too.
I love that you told that story about Shelley Winters and Jack Palance, because Jack Palance's widow, Elaine, is a previous guest of my show, and she lives 4 miles from me. So I'll have to make sure she hears that clip.
Well, I don't know about I don't know about the breath thing. I mean, Shelley Winters said something. I think she said that night that everybody's breath. The problem with Hollywood is not everybody. They didn't have mouthwash like they did. I don't know. She was talking, but you don't have to mention the breath thing to Jack Palance's. But because the guy could do push-ups at the Oscars with one hand. I mean, I give him props. I could never do that.
Yeah, I can't do that now, much less when he was like 70 or something when he did that.
Hello.
Okay, given that The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and Weird Science all came out nearly 40 years ago, what do you think it is about those films that still resonates with not only our generation, the generation it was made for, but also now their kids, and in some cases, their grandkids? What about those films still resonates? How come?
John did not talk down to his audience. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, because I think it's the golden key, as it were. John spoke teenager. He even invented teenager in a way. He invented sort of teenager speak. There are lots of dweeb, ZB, or whatever the words you might come up with. And he had a certain cred, if you will, with the white middle-class kid. I would say white middle-class or white upper-middle-class kid, because the films, depict a certain level of existence, not all the films. Pretty in Pink is, the Harry Dean Stanton. His films do address a lot of issues, class being one of them, and also the cliquiness of high schools. And the adults in John Hughes movies tend to be like the adults in a Peanuts thing. John Hurd and Catherine O'Hara in Home Alone, or John Candy's Many Girlfriends in Uncle Buck, or, I think John, even in the non-teenage movies, had an ability to speak to people, like, let's say, to Uncle Buck, which was disarming, right? Sometimes offensive. Not all his films, I think, even Molly's pointed this out. Some things haven't aged particularly well, but that's okay, It gives people stuff to talk about. And I also think teenage years are sooty years anyway. So they're not clean and pristine and nicely boxed. But to put it simply, when I was a kid, 15 years before, like when I was a teenager and stuff, I was in my mid-20s when I did a lot of the John Hughes stuff. But when I was a teenager, with the major exception of Rebel Without a Cause, a lot of the movies, when they tried to make teen movies, they usually were made by adults who really didn't get teens. Wild in the Streets, there are movies that, were sort of exploitative teen movies. But John's movies had a different vibe to them. And a lot of people tried to imitate them at the time. There were the Porkies, there were sort of the rambunctious teenage comedies and things like that. But John's movies sort of like the camera sort of focused on the teenager and spoke to them. And I think that that's kind of, if you look at cinema history, it's kind of one of the first people to do that. There was an exclusionary aspect to the movies too. Like parents aren't supposed to get this shit anyway, like this isn't for you.
Yeah, that makes sense because my parents didn't give a flying shit about any of those movies that I thought were the greatest thing that ever happened. My parents were like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah. My parents wouldn't give a damn about the things I liked or give it credence until somebody else told them, hey, the Beatles actually write some good songs. Oh, really? The Beatles write good songs, John. Oh, thank you, Mother, for telling me that.
Thanks, Mom. Good looking out.
But, I see it with younger people nowadays. They don't need me to tell them that their stuff is good. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not.
Right.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Introducing Loom Stupid, where fashion meets quirkiness. Whether you're looking for statement tees that spark conversations or funky pieces that add whimsy to your outfit, Loom Stupid has got you covered. Join the fashion revolution and express your unique style with Loom Stupid. Visit our exclusive website at www.loomstupid.com and discover a world of fashion that's brilliantly bizarre and undeniably chic. New designs are being added all the time. loomstupid.com. Get your whimsy on with Loom Stupid. Because being silly is the new stylish.
Let's get back into it.
Now, this may be painful for you, but it is eminently hilarious to me. Would you please, if you're up for it, tell me about the moment that you found out that Emelio Estevez was Martin Sheen's son?
Well, it was painful, but in retrospect, it's kind of funny because I was a Chicago actor. I didn't know any of these kids. They had been working together for a long time before I arrived on the set. They'd been shooting, even before Rick did his stuff. They'd been working together. They were tight. And I didn't know who Emelio Estevez was. I knew who Martin Sheen was, of course. He's a film actor. I knew that he had a heart attack on Apocalypse Now. I also knew that these guys who were over 18, that they would be there. There was Emelio and Judd. The other kids, Molly and Anthony Michael Hall, had to leave because they had to go to school. So when they came around to do my coverage, my close-ups, Emelio and Judd were having fun, putting pencils up their noses and making faces and stuff, trying to get me to laugh when I'm doing my close-up. Now, I hadn't done too many movies at this moment in time, and I was a little bit nervous, also in a jocular mood, giving as good as I get. So I said back to them, I said, you guys would have been great when Martin Sheen was having his heart attack during Apocalypse Now, and you guys are laughing off camera, thinking he's just having a heart attack. And you're sticking pencils up your nose and making faces, and he's there going, having his heart attack. Sort of likening myself to a guy that's struggling, having a metaphorical heart attack on camera, dealing with you minor league a-holes sticking pencils up your nose. Well, as I'm saying this, Judd and Emelio's faces go, well, Judd goes like, holy shit sort of face. And Emilio's face goes white, sullen, flat. His lips get tight. His eyes sort of get beady and stare at me. And then set goes silent. John Hughes goes, oh, shit. And John runs up to me and he whispers in my ear, Emelio Estevez is Martin Sheen's son. And I go, no. And I immediately look at Emelio and I go, Emelio, I didn't know. I didn't know your father was Martin Sheen. I am so sorry. Nothing. I go, hey, I'm really sorry. I was just saying, if the gentleman was having a heart attack, you guys wouldn't be. And like when you're explaining a joke, when you're explaining anything, especially to the son of Martin Sheen, you're in pig Latin, uckfade. So a few years later, I auditioned for Emelio. He was directing, and I was auditioning for like, I don't know, CSI or some hour show. And I said, "Hey, how are you? Good to see you." Went to shake his hand, and that wasn't happening. So I understood, well, I guess I felt badly at the time, and I apologized. I don't have any guilt about it because I think those guys were still behaving in a way that was kind of unprofessional. But there's a little button on this story. Several years later, I'm doing an episode of The West Wing, and Martin Sheen is in the scene. And between takes, I go, "Hey, Mr. Sheen, Martin, may I speak to you a second?" "Yeah, John Kapelos, right? I was in the movie with your son, Breakfast Club." "Oh, yes, of course, John, I remember. Yeah, yeah, it's funny." And I tell him the story, and he looks at me and he laughs, and he goes, "Sometimes my son does not have the best sense of humor." He laughed heartily. I expressed my condolences for having said such a stupid joke. But you gotta let sleeping dogs lie.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing. And I hadn't heard that button, so thank you for that as well. I only have a few more things, and then I promise I'll let you go.
Whatever you want.
I'm having so much fun. You're amazing.
I feel embarrassed now that I wept.
Oh, stop it. So I was born and raised in San Antonio, along with, we went to school together, and I say together, it's a different school, but at the same time, as James Roday.
Oh, yeah, James. I love James.
He had a show called Psych. Now, it took me a while to figure out what he was doing, but eventually on Psych, he had every single cast member who was living as a guest star on the show Psych. And it didn't dawn on me until you were on there. And then I was like, holy shit, he's collecting the whole set. Tell me about that experience. What was that like? And how did you come to be a part of that project? Like, did James call you and say, "Hey, look, I'm collecting the whole set"? Or how did that go?
He was telling me at the time how much he loved the movie. I think I was perhaps the last one.
I think you were the last one. It was either you or Emelio. One of you was the last ones.
No. I think Emelio had done it before me. But
it doesn't matter. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But despite his gentrification and no longer being Hispanic by name.
Oh, he's back to he goes by Roday Rodriguez now.
Roday Rodriguez? Oh.
James Roday Rodriguez is how he titles himself now.
How 2024 of him. The kid was great. I mean, he was, like a lot of people that have seen the movie, just in awe of like the film, which is, I think, worth it. But also just really sweet and friendly and kind, and we had a good time. And also he made a point of telling me that, he had, all these Breakfast Club folk. And, I said, well, why aren't you paying me more then? But then we shot it out in Vancouver. I mean, I love the show. And is it running now on syndication, or is it being streamed somewhere?
Yeah, it's on Peacock. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Seinfeld.
Please.
I have had a few guests who were on Seinfeld. Rance Howard, which is Ron and Clint Howard's father. He played two different characters on two different episodes of Seinfeld. And then, of course, Clint Howard, very, very dear friend. And then Tim DeKay, who actually played Bizarro Jerry. He's a previous guest on my show, too. And now I can say I have had the Sniffing Accountant.
You had Rance Howard?
Yeah. Because Clint's a friend of mine.
So tell me, you're friends with Clint?
Uh-huh.
I love the fucking guy.
Me too. You guys rad as balls. I love that guy.
I met Rance. I loved Rance.
Oh, that guy was amazing. I got to interview Rance at his dining room table. And the thing that tore me up about that was I had such a great conversation with Rance. It was amazing. But before I could even edit and release that episode, Rance passed.
Oh, shit.
But I mean, I did get to go to the memorial service and pay my respects. And it was amazing. But yeah, Clint's a dear friend. I love that guy. He's rad.
I saw an interview on YouTube with Ron, and I thought it was really, really great. Clint was in it. I didn't realize he had a lot of drug and alcohol problems, but God bless him that he's gotten through it.
Oh, he is the happiest that he's ever been right now. He is married. I think he's been married for 3.5 years now, something like that.
Uh-huh.
He's never been happier that I've known him. Okay, so Seinfeld. First, tell me how you got that role. If I understand correctly, you didn't have a whole lot of notice.
My recollection of Seinfeld is that it was something like a Thursday afternoon around 3:00 that I get a call from my agent saying, they'd like you to go over to MTM Radford or CBS Radford Studios and read for Seinfeld. We're faxing you over the audition. So I get the faxed audition, take a look at it. I think I might have been wearing shorts or something. It was like last minute. I wasn't particularly well dressed. I hop in my car and I drive over to MTM Radford and I read. And they asked me to wait after the read. And I sit there and wait. And it's like, 3:30, 4 o'clock. And then they say, oh, we're going to be doing a network read through and you've got the role. Can you stay? And I went, yeah, I can stay. But I wasn't particularly presentable. I said, that's fine. So the next thing I know, I'm going out on the soundstage with all the other actors and I'm reading the episode. And it's like, I'm doing it. And I got the role. And then we rehearse and we shoot the thing. So that was my, experience. And I'm like, I don't even know I was wearing underwear. It was just like, sort of like one of these California things where you come from the pool or something and, T-shirt and pants. But that said, got the role. My hair was kind of longish at that time. They liked it. They said it was sort of mulletish. Then we went to, they rehearsed it. We shot it, I think, the following Thursday or Friday. We did a week's worth of rehearsals. And when I came around to shooting it, I don't know whether this is anything you'd be interested in hearing, but the whole Michael Richards thing, was the most challenging thing I've ever had to shoot ever.
Why?
Because he's so funny and inventive. Before we shot the sequence where we're in the bar, Larry David comes up to me and says, listen, you cannot, I repeat, you cannot break up. You cannot ruin a take and laugh because we don't know what Michael's going to do. And he may not be able to do it again. It's catching lightning. So you really mustn't laugh. Okay? Everybody else can laugh. The audience can laugh. So I went, okay. Now, having worked at Second City and been around funny people, and, normally I'm not normal. I can be the funny one or the straight one, but, okay, fine. There we start shooting. And like Michael starts doing shit like the woman opens the bar thing and it hits his head. When she's going back into the bar to get drinks. So she flips up the bar and it hits his head. He drinks a beer with a cigarette in his mouth and then says, sometimes I like to feel good all the time. That was not scripted. None of that stuff was scripted. He did other stuff, and the whole effing time, you got the camera guys who are almost laughing. The audience is going, crazy. My left side of my body, stage left side of my body, was facing the audience, downstage. And my right side was upstage towards Michael. He's sort of to my right. And I have to get up at one point saying, listen, when I come back, I'm going to be sitting over there. And, I have to go to the restroom. So the whole time he's doing this thing, what I'm doing is biting my upstage cheek. And I'm clamping down on it. Now, if and when you ever watch this again, you might just see every now and then my jaw sort of clench. And what I'm doing is basically biting the bejesus out of my upstage cheek to keep myself from laughing. And I'm just there like this, watching him, biting my upstage cheek. When I went home that night, I looked in the mirror and I had taken a chunk out of the inside of my cheek, but I didn't laugh and I didn't ruin a take. And perhaps some of the funniest stuff on Seinfeld exists, not because of me, but because I didn't allow myself to, giggle.
It's definitely an iconic scene, and you were a huge part of it. So thank you for not laughing.
It was my pleasure.
Okay, this is the last thing I want to talk about. You're also a musician.
It's
You took piano for a whole bunch of years when you were younger, and, a few years ago you started playing the guitar. But, and I was astounded when I found this out, you have music that's out there. It's on Spotify. Everybody can listen to it.
Yeah.
What? Why? Oh, and also, that's pretty selfish of you. You're already an actor, a writer, a director. You're so selfish with the creativity. Now you're also a musician. Come on, dude. Save some for the rest of us.
It's not selfish. I'm giving it away. I'm giving it away. You can buy it or listen to it on Spotify.
No, it's just that you have all the creativity. Like, save some for somebody else, man. Share the creativity.
Well, I'm meeting a lot of people that are a lot more creative than I am. So I'm still overwhelmed by the amount of creative juices people have. But thank you for being so complimentary. And go listen to my album. I covered Don't You Forget About Me on the album.
Oh my God.
And it's called Too Hip for the Room. It's 12 tracks of whack. It's great.
Okay, so one of those tracks, I think it's on that album, is called Ennui.
Ennui, yes.
I love that song so much. Now, I was going to ask you if I could play Ennui.
Of course.
But now that I know that you did Don't You Forget About Me, can I play that song on here?
Shoot, you can play any song you want. You can play them all, man.
I love you so much. Will you do me a favor? Will you introduce that song like you're a radio DJ?
Hey, here's John Kapelos off his album Too Hip for the Room, covering that classic from Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me.
Yes, that's amazing. I'm so excited.
Well, thank you.
You know it, baby. Tell me your troubles and doubts. Giving everything inside and out. Love strange, so real in the dark. Think of the tender thing that we were working on, and slow change may pull us apart. When the light gets into your heart, baby, don't forget about me. Don't you forget about me. Will you stand above me? Look my way, or never love me. Rain keeps falling down. Recognize me, call my name, or walk on by. Rain keeps falling down. Don't you try and pretend it's my feeling, when in the end I won't harm you or touch your defenses, vanity, insecurity. Don't you forget about me. I'll be alone, dancing, you know it, baby. Going to take you apart. I'll put us back together at heart, baby. Don't you forget about me. Don't you forget about me. When you walk on by, will you call my name? When you walk on by, will you call my name? When you walk on by, will you call my name? When you walk on by, will you call my name?
Where can people find you on social media? Where can people reach out and say hi?
The John Kapelos on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me at Too Hip for the Room, or Carpuzzi, Carpuzi, or John Kapelos News. I'm there. I'm on Facebook. You can find me. I'm easily found.
Oh, one more question. Tell me about Lingua Franca.
Well, it's a podcast I did that it's stopped for a bit, that I'm going to be relaunching at the end of this year. And it was a political, also sort of a off-the-wall kind of tribute to National Lampoon kind of podcast. where I did a lot of different characters and stuff. I'm going to be relaunching it, doing a little bit different flavor, bringing out some other people into it, probably in September.
Well, everybody make sure you check out John on his social medias, because I'm sure he will be announcing when those things are back, right?
Yeah. And I appreciate your time and trouble, man.
Oh, absolutely. 100% my pleasure.
You're the hippest thing I've met from Texas.
Oh, well, I'm the coolest cat on this side of the Pecos. John, as we're heading out, is there anything we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about that you specifically wanted to talk about today?
No, I'm just excited to speak with you. Today is my grandnephew's birthday. He's 12 years old. Just sending love to anyone whose birthday it is out there. And I really appreciate the time, man. I hope you don't mind me getting emotional when you talk about my dad and that time. It's important that people get up and get out and get on their feet after tragedy strikes.
You are awesome, my friend. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. You have a great rest of your day and have a fantastic weekend. And make sure you call your grandnephew, great-nephew, call that dude and tell him happy birthday.
All right.
Thank you, John.
All right, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Opening music is the song FSP Theme, written, performed, and provided by Ambush Venn.
Closing music is from the song Say My Name off the 2021 album Underdog Anthems, used with permission from Jax Hollow. If you like the show, tell a friend. Subscribe and rate and review the show on iTunes and wherever else you download podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the episodes are available there as well. Check me out on Vero at Fascination Street Pod and TikTok at Fascination Street Pod. And again, thanks for listening.